And hello, everybody. Welcome back to Popular Music Books in Process. Our series is a collaboration between the Journal of Popular Music Studies, currently looking for people to express interest in writing on the theme 33 1/3 for our issue number, volume 33.3. So if you have a thought about that, let me know. Okay, the POP conference currently sending out acceptances for this year's conference, and things are starting to shape up for April. And IASPM US, which probably has some news, but I can't think of what it is. So those three organizations, and we are here every week. I'm joined and amazingly helped by my co-organizers, Kimberly Mack and Carl Wilson. Carl's gonna field the Q&A part later today, and we always do that in the chat. Previous episodes, can we call that episodes, events, gatherings in the series are all on my YouTube page, which now has like more than 1,300 people who visited the series over the course of this run. So it's amazing how the word spreads over time. So that is fantastic. And thanks to everyone who's told other people about this. Next week in our series, we have 3 people presenting on musical instruments. Matt Brennan on his social history of the drum kit, Brian Wright on his cultural history of the electric bass, and Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, Canadian musician of note, Sue Foley?
That's right.
Guitar woman, conversations and life lessons from the heroines of guitar. But this week, we are going late capitalism. We are going material analysis. We are going, what was the third one that we were thinking maybe could work for today? I already forgot. Okay, but the point is, we've got 2 people going deep, traveling wide, talking about, in Giacomo Bottà's case, deindustrialization and popular music, punk and post-punk in Manchester, Düsseldorf, Torino, and Tampere, which is to say what? England, Germany, Italy, and Finland. And his book is out on Rowman and Littlefield. And he is the holder of a PhD in comparative studies from IULM University in Milan. Now is working as a project manager and professor at the University of Helsinki, their urban studies and planning master's program. Longtime IASPM member, including a couple of edited books, Invisible Landscapes, Popular Music and Spatiality, and then together with notable IASPM member Geoff Stahl, Nocturnes, Popular Music and the Night. Welcome, Giacomo. I'm allowed to say it one more time. Everyone give him a little symbolic clap for staying up till 1 freaking a.m. in the morning to be here with us live. Woo! Say something nice about him in the chat. Okay, onward. Kendra Salois is in the process, right, of finishing her book for University of California Press, Values That Pay, Complicity, Sincerity, and Hip Hop in Contemporary Moroccan Life. So this is an intersection that's not the common, oh, well, but more at the actual underlying ways that they're coming at how popular music rubs against reality. And she is an ethnomusicologist from UC Berkeley, specializing in intersections of popular music's transnational markets and national belonging. Her work appears in Anthropological Quarterly. She sent that article, The Journal of Popular Music Studies. I've heard of that. Performance, Religion, and Spirituality. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Performing Arts at American University in Washington, D.C. But are you not joining us from Washington? You said you're on Central Time.
I'm coming to you live from my in-laws' house in suburban Chicagoland.
Fantastic. Okay. We need these details, right? Because we're doing a little ethnography on the fly. Okay. So as I understand it for today, Giacomo's going to go first. Make sure he's holding it all together. Kendra's going to go second. They're going to talk a little bit, generate some topics, and then encourage us all to weigh in. So take it away, please.
All right. So thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here to present my book, and it's the first time I present my book to an English-speaking audience. So that's also quite, generates some anxiety, but not too much. But first, I think I wanted to say something very general about the process of doing a book presentation, which I call like as some kind of reconstructing knowledge. This is not my PhD, so it's like a sort of second kind of book. The first book I publish anyway, because my PhD was left unpublished. But it took me 10 years to write it because, of course, I'm in a phase of my career where I'm basically, I've been teaching a lot, administration, writing research grants, writing job applications, and so on. So it's very weird because 10 years ago, I had the idea to start researching about industrial cities in Europe and music scenes. Then after 10 years, I've got the book. And then you get the book and you're like, okay, what is it about exactly, and how to compress it in 10 minutes. And it's really difficult. I still haven't read it. So what I'm going to say are just a couple of ideas, scattered ideas from the book. So on a very general level is a qualitative study of music and the industrialization in 4 European cities. So I think I have a map. I don't expect you to know where all these places are, but like the 4 cities under consideration are Manchester in the north of England, like the prototype of the industrial city, the first city which started working in a certain way under like a initiating and growing capitalism and so on. Düsseldorf is a city in the west of Germany, and it lies on the border of the Ruhr area, which is like a massive conurbation of cities, of industrial cities. So very important for metallurgy in Europe. Torino is a one company town of Fiat, like car factory. It's surreal because like in contemporary global capitalism, Fiat was able to acquire Chrysler from Detroit after the last economic recession. So now the two are, I think, one big global concern producing cars. Tampere is a city in continental Finland, so it's like one of the few Nordic cities which are not on the sea, on the shore. So it's inside, and it's quite important in Finland as a city for textile factory and paper mills. And it's quite interesting because Tampere has 2 nicknames. One is Manse, which is like a Finnish distortion of the word Manchester. And the second nickname is Tampester. So, which tells a lot about the role of that city within the country. But so my idea was like that like in a very distinct period in the like economic and political history of the Western world, which is the industrialization, which happened from the late 1970s to the early 1980s. Basically, these cities were shrinking. These cities, so like basically the industries left these cities to go to countries where, of course, work was cheaper and where like the condition and the rights of workers were less defined and respected, and so on and so on and so on. But anyway, these cities were shrinking, and at the same time, popular music scenes were forming and were sort of shaping new waves to make and to consume music. So my first question was like, why in these cities and why exactly in that moment? So why like this new kind of ways to make and consume music were born exactly in a moment where the economy was basically collapsing. So what is like sound in these cities just a consequence of a structural economic change? So is it that like these bands from Manchester, from Düsseldorf and so on, they sound so gloomy because the economy was so bad? Is it where these bands are a reflection of spatial circumstances? So, you know, these cities, you had suddenly you had a lot of empty industrial warehouses and spaces, and is it automatic that these spaces then became rehearsal spaces or became clubs, and that sort of pushed it further? My idea is that like, no, I mean, there is not like a consequence that like music comes after the structural economic change. Music comes after the spatial decay. So my idea in this book is that like basically sound shaped this process. So sound sort of collaborated in the process, which brought the cities from industrial cities to post-industrial cities. So that's the main point I make. And I try to make this point by looking at a before. And in this before, I mean that there was a strong connection between popular music and industrial cities. And it was there from very early on. So from the beginning of the experience of cities becoming industrial, popular music was there, and it was there, for example, to create like a common language to displaced people. Industrial cities are cities which grow very quickly, so there are a lot of people coming in. It has a lot to do with industriousness and with getting things done. And it had a lot to do with noise and repetition. But of course, all these elements, which I read as kind of very interesting in the case of industrial cities, they sort of cease to work during the industrialization. And what happens as affects music a lot. And this is why in post-industrial Tampere, Düsseldorf, Torino, and Manchester, music doesn't play the role that it played during the industrialization. So music becomes, in all these cities, music became kind of a sort of cultural heritage. And it was exploited it is nowadays exploited in a variety of ways that I can talk about later on. But I think this is enough as an introduction. I don't know if now Kendra wants to continue with presenting her book.
Sure. Do you want to unshare, Giacomo?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. First, thank you so much for Eric and Kim and Carl for setting this up and for providing such a cool space of exchange. I've really learned a lot from the videos that I've watched over the series, and I really appreciate being able to share with you guys. Hi, I'm Kendra. As Eric pointed out, I'm an ethnomusicologist. Most of my research has been with Moroccan hip-hop artists and their fans. And I started doing that research in 2008. So for my dissertation, I lived in Morocco and did fieldwork with hip-hop artists and fans from 2009 to 2010. And since then, I returned back most years, sometimes for a week, sometimes for a few months, until 2018. And then in 2019, I had a kid. And then in 2020, no one went anywhere for any reason, under any circumstances. And here's where we are. So that's a tiny, tiny little piece of setup about how I come to have the knowledge that I write about in the book that's currently in process. I started out with a question that was fundamentally really similar to the way that Giacomo just described his own fundamental question, which was, so there's a thriving hip hop scene in Morocco, and it was thriving since the 1990s, but certainly from its very beginnings in the very late 1980s. And I wanted to know, how did the genre interact with the sweeping socioeconomic changes that took place in Morocco since the early 1980s? So I was fascinated by the idea that the first generation of Moroccan hip hop artists, the ones that were first to hear it as like really preteens and teens, coming routed to them through France and through Francophone post-colonial routes, but also coming from the US and then kind of refracting through France. So they were hearing both American and French hip hop at the same time. Who were the first to hear it and the first to adapt it and adopt it and indigenize it, for lack of a better term. I was fascinated by the idea that it served as a response to these changes, because these changes were fundamentally similar to what had been happening in the US at the birth of hip hop in the US. So the same major global sort of meta factors that Giacomo just talked about with the deindustrialization of cities across Europe, right, had also, of course, been happening in New York, famously, which was how's a contributing factor, let's put it that way, to the birth of hip hop. Don't want to overdetermine it, right? That's a major sort of site of controversy, how to describe that, but a contributing factor, right? So I was fascinated by the idea that people who had fallen in love with hip hop thousands of miles and light years away lifestyle wise from the birthplace of hip hop were attracted to it because there might be something fundamentally similar in the changes they were undergoing, right? So that question fascinated me. I wrote a dissertation that seems like many years ago now, that was fundamentally really, what's the word I'm looking for here? Infatuated, maybe, with the research and writing around neoliberalism and neoliberalization at the time that my dissertation was being written. So I was really fascinated by sort of the Anglo-Foucauldian takes on neoliberalism, and especially the idea of neoliberalism as a thing that fundamentally altered the liberal subject. And a lot of my dissertation takes stuff that is written from the perspective of, and really thinking about the perspectives of, people who don't have a lot of personal relationship to Morocco and Moroccan life, but share some of the same big meta socioeconomic changes going on structurally, and applying that to my fieldwork, right? So for many years, revising the dissertation into a book stalled, because I found myself saying, well, I did that, but who cares? Eric, I love that you're laughing. Thank you. I found myself saying, well, why does that matter? I sort of pulled off this theoretical frame that I wanted to do, but why does it matter? And the book I'm writing now is my current answer to why that matters, right? So as you will have noticed, the title is currently Values That Pay: Complicity, Sincerity, and Hip Hop in Contemporary Moroccan Life. I would love to not have hip hop in the title at all, but I don't think my editor is going to let me get away with that. And there are a lot of like really red light buzz flashing keywords in there, right? So the title, the first part, Values That Pay, comes from an interview done by one of Morocco's best known MCs. His name is Don Big. And way back in 2007, he gave an interview where someone asked him how he felt about his then current success. He had just come out with an album that was widely regarded as kind of an instant classic of Moroccan hip hop, and also something that got especially the Francophone, but really all of the Moroccan press talking about what to them seemed like this brand new thing of Moroccan hip hop, although it had already been going on for over a decade. And so this interviewer asked him about his success, and he said, I'm very happy about it, of course. And then he said, it shows that authenticity and sincerity are values that pay. And the idea that values could pay off, that they could be remunerative in some way, was a really amazing way of encapsulating why the framework I'd been working with prior to this mattered. So the book starts from the idea that under what I'm still going to call the neoliberal paradigm, although I'm happy to argue with people about what the best way to do that is, and we use the late capitalism, and I think that's fine too. Under the current paradigm, right? People are highly encouraged in sort of the global north, like the heart of, the birth of neoliberalization, but also in Morocco, highly encouraged to see value, as in use value, financial value, monetary value, and values as tightly interconnected and maybe as collapsing into one another. So this is a reformulation of the ways that people like Wendy Brown used to say that neoliberalization changed the liberal subject, but in a way that I hope makes it easier to understand exactly what's at stake in making that argument. So in order to make that argument, the book pairs these two ideas that I think are in tension. So on one hand, complicity in tension with sincerity, and then on the other, competition in tension with solidarity. So my one sentence way of glossing these is that I would like to, what's the best way of putting this? I would like to recuperate the term complicity as an analytical tool instead of an accusation. Because if we look at complicity as something that someone is unable to escape, then we have to look at the frame in which their choices are so circumscribed that nothing they do cannot be complicit, right? Which is the situation I find my interlocutors were in, these first generation hip hop artists, especially those who, to their own surprise, often became nationally known and celebrated figures in a moment when the state was throwing a lot of resources at, or at least not suppressing, hip hop artists. So they had choices that were immediately productive, immediately positive, but also, I argue in the book, continued to co-construct and align with the goals of the authoritarian state. And then I'd like to argue that if we use it as an analytical tool, it not only requires us to see the full effects of people's choices amongst those limited choices, but also asks us to think more about sincerity as well. So I think of sincerity as the thing that kind of fills in the gaps for or makes up for the inevitable breaks that complicities require. So if you're going to end up breaking faith with your goals for your country or yourself or your relationships, sincerity will paper over or help to mend those gaps. And then in terms of the other pair, competition and solidarity, I think of the hip hop arts, not just music making and not just commercially recorded hip hop music, but the set of practices, the 4 or 5 elements, and really we can consider more. We could think about fashion or filmmaking or other things as well. I think of them as not just driven by individuals who compete in terms of like sort of neoliberalization theory dogma about competitive entrepreneurial subjects, but as really taking competition as also a way of being social with one another, a way of living with one another that's also very restorative, right? So I try to frame that as this constant balance or interaction between competition and solidarity. And I know all of that sounds incredibly like 30,000 feet, but these two pairs have helped me to reorient all of the information that I've collected over the intervening decade and organize it in a way that I hope really gets my argument out there. So the one sentence version of that argument is that the first generation of artists pursue their vision of an ethical citizenry and an ethical nation through hip hop arts and culture, but that it also co-creates the authoritarian state. So implicit in that is the idea that just because they're in a state that people from outside of Morocco, and many inside, but people outside of Morocco in sort of commonplace political science or IR work would say is authoritarian doesn't mean they don't have agency, right? But agency for what? So a lot of my interlocutors argue for visions of rights and freedoms that butt up against my unexamined assumptions about what rights and freedoms should be, right? And so each chapter kind of digs into one of those tensions. Not the chapter that I gave you guys a selection from to read, but for example, in one of them, I start by talking about the ways that a conversation that I witnessed where people were talking about their understanding of the right that LGBTQ citizens had to be themselves in public, right? And they debated back and forth about what they thought the definition of homosexuality was, what they thought the definition of transgender was, what they thought it meant for someone to have that identity in public. And then at the end of that conversation, kind of came back to a notion of personal responsibility and said that like people have the right to be themselves within a private sphere, but not to the extent that their identity intrudes on others' comfort in public. And I bring that up as an example because there were so many moments in my fieldwork where it seemed like there was a contradiction to tease out, and each of those really helped me to elucidate the sort of pairs in tension approach that I just spoke about. So each chapter kind of revolves around those. I should probably stop here because I think I've talked for at least 10 minutes. So yeah, I'll pause. Giacomo, the next thing we wanted to do was sort of ask each other questions, and I will be transparent with everyone. Our goal was to like talk to each other long enough that it would help you guys to generate questions for us. Yeah. So do you want to go?
With the question or with I mean we had identified like four big like core elements we wanted to discuss together. Yes. And like I think the first one was connected in my case to the idea of like these narratives of whiteness, or this idea of whitewashing industrial city music, and in your case I think you wanted to discuss a bit more about the idea of now I think music and nation and narratives of nationality and so on. I don't know who should start now.
Let me try to frame a question for you. So one of the things that we talked about when we talked about your book was the ways in which your conception of industrial city music brings the genres in the title, but also other genres under a new umbrella. Yeah. But one thing that tied them all together was something that you note in the book, and that seems to happen continuously. This idea that genres in the places that you were looking at tend to, I guess the word is deracialize, right? They tend to take the contributions of Black American musics out of the histories. Yeah. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah. That's quite an interesting point I make, because like of course like if we think about the scenes in the cities I consider and the way that they've been then heritagized nowadays, they connect very much to a sort of timeless idea of decay, which goes back can go back a long way in European cultural history. It can connect to I don't know, to romanticism and so on and so on and so on, by a certain kind of post-war filmography as well. But what I'm talking about is happening in the late 70s and early 1980s in the field of popular music. So definitely there are like genealogies which go which pass the Atlantic several times. I mean, in the book, I think I make the example of Kraftwerk, which is an electronic music band from Düsseldorf, which comes before the time I'm talking about. But of course, there's this narrative that, of course, Kraftwerk gave origin to electro when Africa Bambaataa sampled them in Planet Rock. But there is less a narrative about Kraftwerk being themselves influenced by, soul music or funk and so on, which is obvious to me if you listen to Kraftwerk. But of course, Kraftwerk, in their narrative about themselves, they stressed a lot their, German origin and their industrial origin. They used this concept of industrielle Volksmusik, so industrial folk music, to refer to themselves. And they say that their music is very much connected to the fact that they come from this very close to the Ruhr area, which is this industrial conurbation. And then they have all these connections to classical music or to 1920s like expressionist films and so on. And in many ways, by doing so, they sort of deny the fact that a lot of direct musical inspiration is definitely black and American. And it's quite fascinating that like there's a narrative which starts from Kraftwerk and goes to Africa Bambaataa, but there is no narrative before that in the history of what was being done in these cities. And another example is of course Manchester, where of course in late 70s you have a big community from the West Indies, for example, or from Africa itself, and in a lot of like working class immigrant districts, you start hearing electro in Manchester, and it's and then suddenly in the hacienda the people start playing house, and it looks like it comes directly from a white environment, while of course the catchment area is much bigger within the city itself. So there are a lot of issues, I think, there. I'm just now. I just threw a few into our discussion, but I don't know now. Of course, Kendra, I already introduced this idea that like then in your case, of course, there are a lot of narratives connected to Moroccan hip hop being hip hop from Morocco, and so how is nation negotiated, so to say?
Yeah, it's hard. I feel as if one of the things I would like to do with my book is be able to step away from the way that Morocco and by extension other majority Muslim states are often written about, not necessarily by popular music scholars, but by the academy more broadly, where that kind of overdetermines the way that you write about it, right? One of the things that I have observed, and by saying this, I don't mean to throw shade on any of the like incredible and provoking and groundbreaking ethnographies that have inspired my work. But one of the things that I feel like I've observed is that some of us are so interested in discussing the ways that authoritarian regimes stifle freedom of expression that we lose or look less at people's ability to imagine the future or express despite that, right? There's so much interest in the ways that people are limited by this political framework, that there's not a balance of interest in the ways that they are not, right? And I don't necessarily mean like only looking at the ways that they explicitly resist that political framework, because that's often not where the interest is, right? I think that comes through I hope it comes through in the excerpt of the chapter that I gave you. And I don't mean to suggest to anyone in this room that they should have read it necessarily. That's way too much prep to do for a talk like this. But one of the story that I tell in that chapter is one of my chief interlocutors, someone that I got really close to, has been invited to do all these international performances. So she traveled outside of Morocco a lot. And often the reason she was invited had nothing to do with how she sounded and everything to do with pre-existing narratives in that place about how she fit into the way they viewed Muslim women. So her presence as a stand-in for a controversy or a narrative or a debate was the value and not her musicianship. And she was acutely aware of that. And was made aware again and again. So I try to be able to write in a way that moves beyond or doesn't fall into the same trap where we are only talking about Moroccans vis-a-vis the state. And then at the same time, there really is a horizon of possibility. There really is a way that it affects everything one can do. So in the same way that, the government of the US affects everything one can do. We just don't have a narrative about that in quite the same way about ourselves. So I try to really strike a balance and talk about the ways that people talk about their own nation. And so for many of the first generation artists that I worked with, they did want to say that they had power to change their communities and their nation and their citizenry and each other. Even though no one I worked with was explicitly involved with any of the political reform movements of the last few years since the Arab Spring, or before that, really. But they certainly agreed with some things in principle and would talk about specific policy changes in principle, but no one ever that I worked with specifically was interested in changing the format of the government, and were often really pro-monarchy and pro-state in specific ways. But they did think that they could change some things, but those things were, again, things that we don't necessarily think about when we think about how musicians are resistant, right? They could change themselves, or they could change their ability to make a living by constructing markets rather than getting outside of them, right? So again, interesting, like, ways that break the set of expectations that I had come to associate with the group of people in the whole region of the world without even really knowing that I had brought those assumptions with me until they broke them for me.
Okay.
So Giacomo, I know that that we're here till 6, or 7, sorry, 7 Eastern time. Maybe we should do one more and then.
Yeah. Which
Okay.
one?
Let's see. Well, we were gonna talk about. Is it crazy if we do audience response, the next one? So our 3 other, and I'll put them in the chat, our 3 others topics to discuss were heritage. I'll just leave that there. And then we had a category called risky concepts. And then the last one was
disruptions and continuities.
Disruptions and continuities. They sound like game show concepts. Like, what does everyone think are the top 10 things when they think risky concepts? Okay, Eric votes risky concepts. Are there any other votes? Thank you. You can tell that I teach undergrads, right? Because I'm like, guys, interact with me in the chat.
Yeah. Risky concepts. So I have 2, but like the first one is, of course, in industrial city music.
Yes.
It's complicated because all people think that I wrote a book about industrial music. So they are like, where are Einstürzen and Neubauten? And I'm like, no, I'm not talking about Einstürzen and Neubauten, because I'm not talking about industrial music or where are Ministry or Marilyn Manson or whatever. I'm like, no, they sort of, I talk a little bit about the beginning of what is going to become canonized as industrial music, but that's not really what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is like construct some kind of genealogy where basically a certain kind of music and a certain kind of urbanization connected to industrialization sort of come together, and how also how these sort of networks, because this is also very interesting to me. The fact that I mean, there is this transatlantic dimension definitely, and there is this also this all European dimension always, and they bypass capital cities a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, if you think about the first tours of hardcore punk bands from the US in Europe, they sort of went through a network of really like gray, ugly industrial cities, and they didn't go to Rome or to Paris or to London, but they just went to Torino or Bochum or Sheffield, and that's quite fascinating. And so this is why I find this sort of, I try to build this idea of an industrial city music as a big concept. I don't know if I succeed in the book, but like Kendra, your risky concept.
I just put them in the title. Yeah, I would be actually really interested to hear if people have an immediate response to the idea of recuperating the term complicity. I spent a long time thinking about whether one should do this. And I actually want to give a shout out right now because that comes out of a longstanding exchange that I've had with Mark Katz, whom some of you may know. He, until recently, led the US State Department's Next Level program, which is a cultural diplomacy program that takes US hip hop artists, puts them in teams, and sends them to different places around the world for like 2 to 3 week exchange programs. And he and I have been going back and forth for a long time because another thing that I write about is the use of hip hop in US cultural diplomacy. So his work came up really often. And years ago, I used complicity in a piece, and he wrote to me to say, like, I don't think you should call musicians complicit. And I said, well, we're complicit with both the positive and negative aspects of our government, right? Like, I'm complicit with the fact that Joe Biden is president, and I'm ecstatic about that, right? As much as I am complicit with all the things that Trump has done. I don't have control over either of them, but by being a citizen, I'm complicit. And he was like, I don't think I agree with that take. So I have been, yeah, I'd love to hear that. So I've been trying to figure out whether it's, yes, thank you. I've been trying to figure out whether this is a recuperable concept. And so I read a lot of philosophy to try to think of it. And the way that I gloss it in the book is that if we move from making it an accusation to thinking about relations of complicity, where we're unable to do anything other than be complicit, one of the things that discourse about complicity might reveal is that there's actually this deeply human sense of responsibility to one another inside the concept. So if complicity means that you've failed some group you're supposed to be loyal to, then you had responsibility with and for them. So we were together in some way. So it underscores the idea that like humans are together. So if I say that I'm like complicit in the fact that like the coffee I drank from this Keurig machine is contributing thousands of pounds of waste to the environment every day, right? Like I'm responsible in some way for the health of someone who's going to have to deal with that landfill like thousands of miles away, right? So there's a way in which we insist that all humans are together when we say that people are complicit. And that is a direct challenge, in my view, to the aggressive individualization of normative neoliberal rhetoric. So I thought maybe we could actually turn the concept around. Eric, did you want to talk?
Sorry, I have to remember to unmute myself. You'd think I'd know that by now. I'll just say real quick that I think that in some ways, what you're both engaging at the moment of hip hop's birth and punk becoming post-punk is essentially the moment where a lot of things that people had faith in, like the vernacular's power to create a revolutionary force, and popular culture's dominant position and the need to sort of not sell out and blah, 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 all sort of started to break down. And,
Mhm.
and I think that we've been casting around for different languages to encompass this. I think that
Yeah.
Kim's own book on fictional blues and sort of seeing a blues musician as a figure who's offering narrative rather than a kind of epic embodied presence, is part of that. For me, looking at the history of music books, it was there in this turn away from a kind of, I sort of saw this moment where the vernacular became a kind of god that failed in a lot of these books, and all these great genre studies that sort of saluted the power of the people to have their music encompassed in one form or another. It
Mhm.
started to get more complicated. And it's amazing to me that 40 years later, we're still casting around for so many of these new ways of encompassing what's taken place since. The final point I'd make, and again, just riffing, is I think Jennifer Lena's book on genres had a nice intervention too, because she really made a point of insisting that the role of government in shaping music genres was something that hadn't been stressed enough. So she really put in a role for government regulation and government authority as a force. And it really went against the grain, again, of these studies that sort of saw genre, even if they were smart people and they sort of corrected for some of their earlier rashness, they still wanted the genres to sort of flow organically out of something. And I think that we're much more interested, what you're calling complicit, I think works on multiple levels as an invitation to see things from a critical distance, to see an enmeshing rather than an inside and an outside, or whatever metaphor you prefer. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I did very much appreciate the way that you linked both books together in that comment. I feel you on the surprising hole where narratives about authenticity have been. I feel as if only in the last couple years have my students stopped responding to or with the sort of implicit idea that once a music genre was pure and then it sold out, right? And then they could kind of apply that to any given genre, and often that was where their responses to something were coming from. And only in the last couple of years have my students ceased to come with that, which has also left me being like, oh well, I also don't know what we're going to talk about if we're not going to start from there. If I don't have to break that down, what are we going to do?
While we're still on the complicity thing, I just Yusuf and Kim have both been invoked. So if either of them wanted to weigh in or ask further questions here. Yusuf, do you want to unmute and speak rather than in the chat?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me just move inside. Thank you.
We lost you, Yusuf. Cannot hear you.
Still not?
No, now you're good.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you for this these two amazing presentations. I am a second year graduate student at NYU, and I work on Egyptian rap. I do some myself, and it's just that I think a lot about this idea of complicity. Maybe not in the way you framed it, but I don't know. I feel that this term. I mean, I haven't read the book obviously, but this term carries in it a sense of responsibility, which might be reminiscent of the classic approaches to hip hop as resistance and like emancipation and stuff like that. And I don't know. I mean, with people in the community of rap in Egypt, I haven't met anyone who really thinks of themselves as wanting to change the system. I mean, very little can be accomplished in Egypt right now. People are in prison for any form of like free expression, and I don't know. I feel a lot of I find it very relatable to just want to make money out of your own art and kind of like change people's sensibilities, which is what's happening right now. And it's fine to not want to change the system, and it kind of like makes me a bit bitter to think of this worldview as being complicit of a system that originated this way of viewing the world, you know. Yeah, I just have this comment.
Yeah, I have thoughts, but I don't know if Kim wanted to go.
Oops. Sorry, having some trouble here. No, I guess I was just going to ask you, I was curious about, you mentioned the thing about your students and sort of coming through the other side of this question of authenticity. And I'm just wondering how do you feel that they got there, and what's your take on that? Because I thought that was compelling to hear.
That's a great
So
question.
maybe take each of those in turn.
Yeah. Let me try to go to Yusuf's point first. I'm glad you're here. I so appreciate hearing this, and I really appreciate what you said in the chat. I think I'm coming from where you're coming from. One of the things that my interlocutors showed me was that there was tons of energy around change, but it was change of what and change for what. And the change was aesthetic sensibilities for sure. Like trying to get away from an over-reliance on, or like kind of being nonstop surrounded by genres that they thought were sort of musically and aesthetically over. So there's definitely that. And that, I think many in this room would agree, like that in itself is sufficiently generative. Like that in itself is sufficiently revolutionary, for lack of a better word, right? Like that has huge impacts on people, changing people's aesthetic sensibilities. So there's no way we should ever discount that kind of change. But I also, agree with you that I think there's something fundamentally, I'm struggling with how to say this because I do not want to throw other hip hop scholarship from now or anywhere prior under the bus in any way, but there's something maybe a little unfair in constructing narratives about how fundamentally or essentially liberatory hip hop is, and then judging other hip hop scenes on whether they achieve it or not. And I don't want to say that any one scholar, ever does that, but that once the narrative is set that way, then the way things are read and what you choose to write about kind of lives up to that. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why the concept became so interesting to me, because I thought I could talk about the ways that the musicians I worked with consistently spoke about their responsibilities to the music and each other. But what they wanted to change, and as you put it, what they had the energy to change, was not the things that somebody writing in foreign policy wanted Moroccans to be changing. And your other point that of course people should be able to like make money and express themselves and make a living from music, right? For the people that I have worked with, the ability to make a living out of performing is so far away for almost everyone in hip hop, and then almost everyone in every genre of Moroccan music. Like to be able to make money out of performance in a context where the vast majority of performances that aren't at a wedding or something are not paid for. So if you're a genre that doesn't get performed at a wedding or another sort of life cycle event for hire, then there's no way you're making a living from music, and there's definitely not a way that you're making any money from selling a recording. So a lot of the energy that I experienced was around creating a formal market in a place where there's nothing but informal markets for music making. So really, really quickly, Kim, to answer your question, I am not sure what comes after having the pleasure of breaking down students' unexamined assumptions about authenticity. I think my students no longer get introduced to that narrative before they come to me. And so instead, we get to talk about what they think it means to be authentic, but that's like a whole nother, maybe that's a whole nother conversation. I'm sorry, that's not a super good answer.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to let Maya know that I haven't forgotten about her question, which we'll go back to. But maybe for the sake of bringing Giacomo into the conversation here and just keeping things circulating, Eric, do you want to ask the question that you brought up for Giacomo?
Yeah, I apologize. I assure attendees who've been here for a while know I try not to over ask questions, but I did sort of feel like this was a good moment for balance to bring Giacomo back in and try to get at some of the affect, the emotional work involved in this post-industrial city musical framing. I joked on all that is solid melts into air becoming all that is solid melts into gloom. If that doesn't translate between here and Finland, I apologize. But there's been this notion from the great Marshall Berman book that modernity carried with it a whole set of emotions and relations to power. And I'm just wondering if you can sort of, without trying to be Marshall Berman, God knows, just talk a little bit about some of what went with the shift that you're describing. And especially, I was asking what happens to the figure of the worker up against the machine, shaking a fist against the state in this post-industrial context.
Yeah, well, I mean, the simple, the easiest question is that just that kind of laborer you are describing just became invisible. So just left the picture altogether. So it's quite interesting to see how at least as a narrative and as a branding for these cities, the post-industrial kind of experience became like very quickly the new paradigm of development, and it took some years to understand that the industrial spaces could be heritagized and could become part of the offer of the city. So cities like Manchester, Düsseldorf started to brand themselves as places of fashion, places of tourism, and places of the creativity. The creative city narrative stepped in very quickly, and so on. So I think that what you're referring to in terms of like at the emotional level and so on, I think there are a lot of elements which I found especially in hardcore punk, where this is sort of dealt with as a kind of trauma. How do you say? as a kind of trauma. So there are a lot of bands which are absolutely desperate. That like hardcore can be just very fast, very aggressive, very angry, but like the level of desperation that I found in Torino, in Tampere, and so on is like something which of course reflects to this like industrial city turning into like a specter, like a ghost which comes back and hunts the post-industrial city, so to say. And that's also why it's fascinating how hardcore is sort of excluded somehow from the heritage. Many people talk about synth pop, talk about industrial, talk about experimental stuff, but hardcore punk is left a bit in a corner because at least according to me it's so much dramatic and desperate, so to say. I don't know
so
if I
yeah, that's great. Yeah. Let's go back to Maya's question from the top of the chat now about language, which I think can go to both of you in different ways. Maya, you there?
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Crying baby in other rooms. I ran out. So yeah, so my research is primarily in the post-colonial Francophone world. So thinking about particularly Morocco as this, former French protectorate, and how language represents sort of identity formation tied to language. And so, but we also have hip hop, which is this global phenomenon that originates with English speaking sort of population. And so I'm wondering what languages are being used in the music that they're listening to. Is there code switching involved? What sort of identity? What are people saying about identity and the decisions they make about language? And I'm sure this question can also go to Giacomo, looking at these 4 different cities with 4 different national languages, but one genre that is going throughout these spaces.
I can quickly answer that. So the situation in Morocco is really heteroglossic and fascinating, and Moroccans are, in my experience, often really good, like sort of folk sociolinguists. They have a lot of sort of narrative about what's used and when and what it signifies that they enjoy telling you about. And I enjoy hearing it. So the vast majority of Moroccan hip hop that's been recorded is in Moroccan Arabic, which is quite dissimilar from modern standard Arabic. So it really speaks and can be dissimilar from city to city as well. And definitely from generation to generation as well, especially if you're talking about hip hop, where like slang and sort of inside references are really important. So it definitely speaks to musicians and fans co-constructing a smaller identity within a Moroccan identity, like a sense of belonging with their group, especially if, as in the last chapter of my book, we're talking about sort of the latest iteration of Moroccan hip hop, where the people that I worked with 10 years ago are like, what is that even about? Right? They're doing this like thing that I now recognize as classic, where they're like, they're not saying anything important. What is this? What's going on there? And it's a lot about their linguistic choices, but still under the umbrella of Moroccan Arabic or Darija. And then French often comes in for people who feel competent to rap in French. And so many of those people in the Moroccan context have been people with ties to or were originally from sub-Saharan Africa, or people who studied in a Francophone country outside of Morocco for a long time. And interestingly, I feel like they also come to their verse construction with some different rhetorical techniques because they are using French. And increasingly, English is more and more important within recorded music as well as in everyday conversation. It was always a marker of sort of extreme sophistication within hip hop to be able to use English hip hop signifiers and understand what they mean. But the music coming out now is much more likely to mix French, English, and Moroccan Arabic much more equally. So it speaks to the ways that musicians are trying to position themselves as translocally as possible, except changing educational patterns and changing patterns in the kind of socioeconomic level of prominent artists have made that positioning different over time.
Yes, in my case, of course, it was very much part of this kind of strategy of authenticity. Was very much connected to like basically singing in your own language. So I'm talking about the Finnish band singing Finnish, Italian band singing in Italian, and so on. But and of course, very important, I think, was also the use of local accents. So I mean, to affirm this being from the second city in the country, from the ugly city, and so on. It was also connected to like sporting your accent and making it like part of your constructing or your locality. I don't know if clear. But yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Maybe coming off of the back of that, just because I don't see any further questions in the chat, I think probably most of us in the room, I don't want to generalize to everyone, are a lot more familiar with the Düsseldorf and Manchester scenes in the period that Giacomo is talking about. And I'd just be curious to like hear a little description of how the Finnish and Italian scenes compared and to what degree they had transnational ambitions that were similar to the musicians there and to what degree they didn't. I'd just be interested in hearing some more of the background story there.
Yeah, I mean, both Tampere and Torino are quite important in this hardcore punk scenes. So in Tampere there is also like the early punk in Finland is connected to bands from Tampere, and I'm talking about 78 to 1980. But then the 1982 is the year of hardcore punk, and there are several Finnish bands which sort of have some cult status. There is also this very interesting relation with Brazil, where there are like bands from 1982 from Tampere, which are still like very famous in punk circles in Brazil. And it's something that is very much connected to some cassettes, which like a box of cassettes from Finland, which arrived in Rio, I suspect. And also, I mean, Sepultura, you all know probably the metal band Sepultura, the Arise video, which made them famous on MTV. I think Max Cavalera was wearing a t-shirt of Chaos, which is a band from Tampere. So it's quite bizarre, this connection. And then Torino had like several bands which toured a lot around Europe. But in Torino, we're only talking about a hardcore band. There was also an industrial band, industrial scene, but it was much smaller. But the hardcore punk scene was quite big. There were several bands which toured a lot in Europe, and one band called Negazione also tried to do the step to thrash metal. When the 80s finished, there was this tendency of many hardcore bands try to join the thrash metal kind of crossover kind of thing. But there were a lot of problems. Of course, Italy is not a country where alternative music is supported or anyway find an audience, which so I think many bands from Torino played more abroad than throughout Italy itself. So some bands never played like Rome, for example. So that's quite bizarre.
Thank you. We're at the end of our questions in the chat, but I'll give 1 second to see if anybody has anything pressing they want to raise. Just speak up. Okay, maybe we'll stop there then. So yeah, I want to thank Kendra and Giacomo so much for this great session.